The morning mist hung low over the Lamar Valley as Detective James Monk stepped out of his patrol vehicle, the crunch of frost beneath his boots breaking the eerie silence that had settled over Yellowstone's wilderness. At 42, Monk had seen his share of death during his 15 years with the Park County Sheriff's Department, but finding a child's body never got easier. "What do we have, Torres?" Monk asked his partner, Detective Sarah Torres, who was already photographing the scene near the Yellowstone River's edge. "Caucasian male, approximately 8 to 10 years old," Torres replied, her voice steady but strained. "Hiker found him about an hour ago. No obvious signs of trauma from here, but..." She gestured toward the small figure partially hidden by the riverbank vegetation. Monk approached slowly, his trained eyes taking in every detail of the scene. The boy was wearing a blue jacket with a distinctive wolf patch, jeans and small hiking boots. His position suggested he hadn't simply fallen into the water. Someone had placed him there deliberately. "Any missing persons reports?" Monk asked, crouching beside the body while maintaining the integrity of the scene. "That's the thing," Torres said, checking her notes. "Got a call from the West Entrance station about 30 minutes ago. Family reported their nephew missing yesterday evening. 8-year-old Tyler Morrison from Billings, Montana, staying at the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel with his aunt and uncle for a family vacation." Monk studied the boy's face, peaceful despite the circumstances. Tyler Morrison. The name would be etched in his memory forever, along with all the others who died too young on his watch. "Where's the family now?" he asked, standing and surveying the surrounding area for any evidence that might have been missed. "Still at the hotel, waiting for us. The aunt, Rebecca Morrison, is, well, she's not handling this well. The uncle, David Morrison, is trying to keep it together, but you can see he's barely holding on." The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. The coroner's van and crime scene unit had arrived, along with several National Park Service rangers who would help coordinate with federal authorities. Death in a national park meant multiple jurisdictions and careful protocol. Detective Monk, Ranger Captain Lisa Martinez, approached with a grim expression. "I've been coordinating with the family since last night. There's something you should know before you talk to them." Monk nodded, stepping away from the immediate crime scene as the technical team began their work. "Go ahead." "The boy wasn't just visiting with his aunt and uncle," Martinez said quietly. "His parents died in a car accident 6 months ago. The Morrisons are his legal guardians now. This was supposed to be their first family trip together, a way to help Tyler adjust to his new life." The weight of that information settled heavily on Monk's shoulders. An orphaned child just beginning to heal from one tragedy, only to become the victim of another. The injustice of it made his jaw clench with familiar anger. "Any initial thoughts on what happened?" Martinez asked. Monk looked back toward the river where Tyler's body lay. The location was remote but accessible, about half a mile from the nearest parking area. Someone familiar with the park could have easily carried a child here under cover of darkness. "Too early to say for certain," Monk replied. "But this wasn't an accident. Someone wanted us to find him, but not right away. The question is who had access to Tyler last night, and why they'd want to hurt an 8-year-old boy who'd already lost everything." As the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the stark beauty of Yellowstone's landscape, Detective Monk prepared himself for one of the most difficult conversations of his career. Somewhere in that hotel was a killer who had looked into a child's trusting eyes and chosen murder. And if his instincts were right, that killer was someone Tyler should have been able to trust completely. The Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel lobby buzzed with the usual morning activity of tourists planning their day in Yellowstone, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded just miles away. Detective Monk and Torres made their way to the hotel manager's office, where the Morrison family waited in a private conference room. Rebecca Morrison sat hunched in a chair by the window, her auburn hair disheveled and her eyes red from crying. She was 34, with the kind of face that would normally be described as warm and maternal, but grief had carved harsh lines around her mouth and eyes. Her husband, David, stood behind her chair, one protective hand on her shoulder. At 37, he had the build of someone who worked with his hands, broad shoulders, calloused palms, and the kind of tan that came from outdoor labor rather than vacation time. "Mr. and Mrs. Morrison," Monk said gently, as he and Torres entered the room. "I'm Detective Monk, and this is Detective Torres. We're very sorry for your loss." Rebecca looked up with desperate hope that quickly crumbled when she saw their expressions. Did you find Tyler?" "Yes, ma'am," Torres said, sitting across from the couple. "We found Tyler this morning. I'm afraid we're now investigating his death as a homicide." The word hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She doubled over, a keening wail escaping her throat that made both detectives wince. David's face went pale, and he gripped his wife's shoulder tighter. "Homicide?" David's voice cracked. Someone killed Tyler. But who would hurt a little boy? He never did anything to anyone." Monk studied both of their reactions carefully. Genuine grief was hard to fake, and both Rebecca and David appeared genuinely devastated. But 15 years of police work had taught him that appearances could be deceiving, especially when family was involved. "We need to ask you both some questions about yesterday evening," Monk said. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but any information you can provide might help us find who did this to Tyler." Rebecca nodded through her tears, wiping her nose with a tissue David handed her. "Anything. We'll tell you anything that might help." "Let's start with yesterday afternoon," Torres said, notebook ready. "Walk us through Tyler's day from when he woke up until you last saw him." David cleared his throat and began. "We got up around 7, had breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Tyler was excited about seeing the hot springs, so we spent the morning walking around the terraces. He loved the colors, kept asking how the water got so hot. He was such a curious kid," Rebecca added, her voice barely above a whisper, "always asking questions about everything. Since his parents died, he's been quieter, but yesterday he seemed more like his old self." "What happened after lunch?" Monk asked. "We came back to the room so Tyler could rest," David continued. "Rebecca had a headache, so she lay down for a nap. Tyler and I played cards for a while, then watched some cartoons on TV." "What time was this?" Torres asked. "Maybe 2 o'clock until about 4:30, David replied. "Then we all went to dinner at the hotel restaurant again. Tyler ordered a cheeseburger and fries, barely touched it. He said he wasn't feeling well." Monk noticed Rebecca flinch slightly when David mentioned Tyler not eating. "Was Tyler sick often?" he asked. "Not really," Rebecca said quickly. "Just sometimes he got nervous stomach aches when he was anxious. New places, new people. He was still adjusting to living with us." "Tell us about after dinner," Torres prompted. David's expression grew troubled. "That's when things got complicated. Tyler wanted to go for a walk around the hotel grounds. It was still light out, and there were other families around, so we said okay. But he had to stay where we could see him from our room window." "And did he?" Monk asked. Rebecca and David exchanged a look that didn't go unnoticed by either detective. "Mostly," David said finally. "But around 8 o'clock, Rebecca realized she couldn't see him anymore. We went out to look for him, asked other guests if they'd seen him. The hotel staff helped us search for about an hour before we called the rangers. During that hour of searching, did either of you leave the hotel grounds?" Torres asked. Another exchanged glance. "I drove around the nearby parking areas," David admitted. "Thought maybe Tyler had wandered toward the visitor center, or gotten confused about which building was our hotel." "How long were you gone?" Monk pressed. "Maybe 20-30 minutes, David said. "Rebecca stayed at the hotel in case Tyler came back on his own." Monk made notes while Torres continued the questioning. Something about their timeline didn't sit right with him. Too many gaps, too many opportunities for someone to have taken Tyler without being seen. "I need to ask you both a difficult question," Monk said, looking directly at each of them. "Is there anyone in your family, anyone in Tyler's life who might have wanted to hurt him? Anyone who opposed your guardianship? Anyone who had issues with Tyler's parents?" Rebecca's face went white. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Mrs. Morrison. I'm asking if there's anyone we should be looking at as a potential suspect." David's jaw tightened. "Tyler's grandparents on his father's side weren't happy about us getting custody. They thought he should have gone to them instead of Rebecca's sister. But they're elderly, living in Florida. They couldn't. "Anyone else?" Torres asked. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, then spoke so softly they almost missed it. "My brother Marcus." David's head snapped toward his wife. "Rebecca, no, don't even think that." "Who is Marcus?" Monk asked, sensing they'd hit something important. "Tyler's father's brother," Rebecca said, tears flowing again. "He contested our guardianship, said Tyler should go to him instead of us, but the court decided against him because of his problems." "What kind of problems?" Torres pressed. David answered reluctantly. "Marcus has a history of drug addiction and some minor criminal charges. The court felt Tyler would be more stable with us. Marcus was angry about it, made some threats, but nothing serious." "What kind of threats?" Monk asked sharply. Rebecca looked at David, who nodded grimly. "He said we'd regret taking Tyler away from his real family, that we didn't deserve him, that we'd be sorry." Monk felt the familiar tingle of a lead developing. When was the last time either of you had contact with Marcus? 2 weeks ago, Rebecca whispered. He called the house, said he was clean now and wanted to see Tyler. We told him no, that it would confuse Tyler more. He hung up on us, but what? But I think someone's been watching our house lately, David said reluctantly. Strange cars parked across the street, someone walking by more often than normal. Rebecca thought I was being paranoid. Monk and Torres exchanged a look. They had their first real suspect. We're going to need Marcus's full name and last known address, Monk said, and we'll need to search Tyler's room here at the hotel. As they prepared to examine Tyler's belongings, Monk couldn't shake the feeling that the Morrison family was still holding something back. The way Rebecca had hesitated before mentioning her brother, the way David had tried to stop her from talking about him, there were more secrets in this family, and one of them had gotten Tyler Morrison killed. The forensics team had just finished processing Tyler's hotel room when Detective Monk's phone rang. The caller ID showed the Park County Sheriff's Department, and he stepped into the hallway to take the call. Monk here. Detective, this is Deputy Harris. We've got some information on that Marcus Morrison you asked us to track down. He's not in Montana anymore. Monk felt his pulse quicken. Where is he? That's the thing. According to his parole officer, he's supposed to be in Missoula, working at a construction site. But when we called to verify, his supervisor said he didn't show up for work 3 days ago. No call? No explanation? Just disappeared. 3 days ago would have put Marcus's disappearance right around the time the Morrison family left for Yellowstone. That couldn't be a coincidence. Any idea where he might have gone? Monk asked. We're checking with known associates, but detective, there's something else. Marcus Morrison owns a 2015 gray Ford pickup truck. We put out a BOLO alert, and a ranger reported seeing a vehicle matching that description in the Lamar Valley parking area yesterday around 7 p.m. Monk's blood ran cold. The Lamar Valley was where they'd found Tyler's body. Did the ranger get a plate number? Partial. Enough to confirm it was likely Marcus's truck. Find that truck, Harris, and put out an APB on Marcus Morrison. Consider him armed and dangerous. Monk ended the call and immediately sought out Torres, who was interviewing hotel staff in the lobby. When he told her about Marcus's whereabouts and the truck sighting, her expression grew grim. So that places him at the scene around the time Tyler disappeared, she said. But how would he have known the family was here? Social media, Monk suggested. Or he could have been following them. David mentioned thinking someone was watching their house. They returned to the conference room where Rebecca and David Morrison waited. The couple looked exhausted, clinging to each other for support as the reality of Tyler's death continued to sink in. We have some updates, Monk said, taking a seat across from them. We've been trying to locate Marcus, and it appears he's no longer at his registered address in Missoula. Rebecca's face went pale. What do you mean he's no longer there? He disappeared from his job site 3 days ago, Torres explained. The same day you left for Yellowstone. Rebecca, did you post anything on social media about this trip? Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, I posted pictures on Facebook. Tyler at the breakfast table, excited about the trip, our route to Yellowstone. I thought it was safe. I never thought Marcus would... David wrapped his arms around his wife as she began to sob again. You couldn't have known, he said softly, but Monk could see the anger building in the man's eyes. There's more, Monk continued. A park ranger reported seeing a truck matching Marcus's description in the Lamar Valley yesterday evening. That's where we found Tyler. David's face hardened. So he followed us here. He took Tyler and... He couldn't finish the sentence. We're doing everything we can to find Marcus, Torres assured them, but we need you to help us understand his relationship with Tyler. How well did Tyler know his uncle? Rebecca wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. Tyler loved Marcus. Before the addiction got bad, Marcus was like a big brother to Tyler's father. He used to babysit Tyler, take him fishing, teach him to throw a baseball. Tyler always asked about him after we got custody. Did Tyler know about Marcus's problems? Monk asked. We tried to keep it from him, David said. Tyler had been through enough trauma. We told him Uncle Marcus was sick and couldn't visit right now, but that we hoped he'd get better soon. Monk made notes while considering their next move. Marcus Morrison was looking more and more like their primary suspect, but something still bothered him about the timeline and the family's reactions. I need to ask you both to think carefully, he said. Yesterday evening, during the time Tyler was missing and before you called the Rangers, did either of you see Marcus or anyone who looked like him around the hotel? David shook his head immediately, but Rebecca hesitated. There was... no, probably nothing. What? Torres pressed. Even if it seems unimportant, it might help. When I was looking for Tyler near the visitor center, I saw someone in a baseball cap watching me from across the parking lot. It was getting dark, and I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about the way he stood reminded me of Marcus. Why didn't you mention this before? Monk asked. Because I wasn't sure, Rebecca said defensively, and I thought I was just being paranoid because of everything that had happened with the custody case. I talked myself out of it. David stared at his wife in shock. Rebecca, if you thought you saw Marcus, why didn't you tell me? Because you were already stressed enough about Tyler being missing. I didn't want to make things worse if I was wrong. Monk's radio crackled to life. Detective Monk, this is Ranger Martinez. We've found the grey pickup truck abandoned about 5 miles south of Mammoth Hot Springs. Vehicle appears to be empty, but we're setting up a perimeter. We're on our way, Monk responded, then turned to the Morrisons. We need you both to stay at the hotel until we know more. Don't leave the grounds, and if you see Marcus or anyone suspicious, call us immediately. As Monk and Torres prepared to leave for the truck's location, Rebecca grabbed Monk's arm. Detective, you have to understand. Marcus wasn't always like this. The drugs changed him, made him angry and desperate, but he genuinely loved Tyler. I can't believe he would actually hurt him. People do things they never thought they'd do when they're desperate, Monk replied gently. The Marcus you knew before might not be the same person who took Tyler yesterday. But as they drove toward the abandoned truck, Monk found himself questioning that assumption. If Marcus had killed Tyler, why abandon the truck so close to the scene? Why not drive back to Missoula and establish an alibi? The more he learned about this case, the more he suspected there were pieces of the puzzle they hadn't found yet. And in his experience, the missing pieces were often the most important ones of all. The abandoned grey Ford pickup sat in a small pullout beside the Gardner River, its doors unlocked and keys still in the ignition. Detective Monk walked around the vehicle methodically, while the crime scene team processed it for evidence, noting the Montana plates that matched Marcus Morrison's registration. No signs of struggle inside the cab, forensic technician Amy Chen reported. But we've got some child-sized footprints in the dirt beside the passenger door and what looks like adult prints leading toward the river. Torres emerged from the truck's bed, holding up an evidence bag. Found this wedged under the tailgate, a small blue button. Looks like it could have come from a child's jacket. Monk examined the button through the plastic. It was the same shade of blue as Tyler's jacket and appeared to have been torn off forcibly. Bag it and get it to the lab. Any other evidence of Tyler being in this truck? Some dark hair fibers on the passenger seat that could be a match, Chen replied. And detective, there's something else you should see. She led Monk to the driver's side, pointing to the dashboard. Look at the fuel gauge. The needle pointed to nearly full. Monk frowned. If Marcus had driven from Missoula to Yellowstone and then to this location, the tank should have been much lower. He filled up somewhere recently, Torres observed. We can check gas stations along the route, see if we can get surveillance footage. Monk's radio crackled. Detective Monk, this is Ranger Martinez. We've got a situation at Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel. You need to get back here immediately. What kind of situation? Monk asked, already heading back to their vehicle. It's the Morrison family. There's been an incident. 20 minutes later, Monk and Torres rushed into the hotel lobby to find paramedics loading Rebecca Morrison onto a stretcher. Her face was bruised, her lips split, and she appeared to be sedated. What happened? Torres demanded. David Morrison sat in a chair nearby, his right hand wrapped in a bloody towel, his face a mask of rage and guilt. Ranger Martinez approached with her incident report. About 30 minutes ago, hotel guests reported hearing shouting from the Morrisons' room, Martinez explained. When security investigated, they found Mrs. Morrison injured and Mr. Morrison claiming he'd been defending her from an intruder. Monk looked at David Morrison's injuries. Scraped knuckles consistent with hitting someone, defensive wounds on his arms. Did anyone see this alleged intruder? That's the problem, Martinez said quietly. Hotel security cameras show no one entering or leaving the Morrisons' floor except hotel staff and the family themselves, and Mr. Morrison's story about the intruder keeps changing. Torres knelt beside David's chair. Mr. Morrison, we need you to tell us exactly what happened. David's eyes were wild, darting between the detectives and his wife being loaded into the ambulance. He was there, he said desperately. Marcus was in our room when we got back from dinner. He grabbed Rebecca, started shaking her, demanding to know where Tyler was. I had to stop him. Where is Marcus now? Monk asked. He ran when I fought back. Went out through the bathroom window onto the fire escape. Monk and Martinez exchanged glances. The Morrisons' room was on the 3rd floor, a dangerous escape route that would leave obvious signs if someone had actually used it. "David," Torres said gently, "we need you to be completely honest with us. Is that really what happened?" David's composure cracked. "You don't understand," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Rebecca keeps blaming herself for Tyler's death. She says if she hadn't posted those pictures online, if she hadn't mentioned Marcus to you, Tyler would still be alive. She's falling apart and I don't know how to help her." "Is that why you hit her?" Monk asked directly. The accusation hung in the air like a physical weight. David buried his face in his hands. "She was talking about killing herself," he whispered. "Said Tyler would be alive if she was dead instead. I tried to stop her from hurting herself and she fought back. I never meant for her to get hurt." Torres made notes while Monk processed this development. Domestic violence often escalated during times of extreme stress, and losing a child was one of the most traumatic experiences a family could endure. "Mr. Morrison, you're going to need to come with us to answer some questions," Monk said, "and we'll need to speak with your wife once the doctors clear her." As they prepared to transport David to the sheriff's station, Monk's phone rang. It was Deputy Harris with an update on Marcus Morrison's whereabouts. "Detective, we got a hit on Marcus Morrison's credit card. Gas station in West Yellowstone yesterday at 6:47 p.m. Surveillance footage shows him alone. No sign of the boy." Monk checked his timeline. That would have been about an hour before Tyler was reported missing from the hotel, and West Yellowstone was 45 minutes away from Mammoth Hot Springs. "Harris, I need you to pull all available surveillance from the route between West Yellowstone and Mammoth Hot Springs between 6:45 and 9:00 p.m. yesterday, and get me everything you can on David Morrison's background, financial records, employment history, any criminal history." "You think the husband's involved?" Torres asked after Monk hung up. "I think this family has more secrets than they're telling us," Monk replied. "And I'm starting to wonder if Marcus Morrison is a red herring." As they drove David Morrison to the station for questioning, Monk couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial about Tyler's death. The evidence against Marcus was circumstantial at best, and David's behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious. In his experience, when a case started falling apart this quickly, it usually meant the real killer was still out there, and often closer to home than anyone wanted to admit. Detective Monk sat across from David Morrison in the sparse interrogation room, studying the man's body language as he shifted uncomfortably in the metal chair. David's story about Marcus breaking into their hotel room had more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese, and Monk was determined to find the truth. "Let's go over this one more time, David," Monk said, his voice calm but insistent. "You're telling me that Marcus Morrison somehow got into your third-floor hotel room, attacked your wife, and then escaped down a fire escape ladder that hotel maintenance confirms hasn't been used in months." David's jaw tightened. "I know how it sounds, but that's what happened." Torres entered the room with a file folder and took the seat beside Monk. "David, we just got the surveillance footage from the gas station where Marcus used his credit card yesterday evening. He was there at 6:47 p.m. alone. The timestamp on the receipt and the video both confirm he was 45 minutes away from Mammoth Hot Springs at that time." "So?" David said defensively. "That doesn't mean he couldn't have driven to the hotel after that." "Actually, it does," Monk replied, opening his notebook, "because we also have surveillance from the hotel parking lot that shows your rental car leaving the premises at 7:15 p.m. and returning at 8:45 p.m. That's an hour and a half, David. Where did you go?" David's face went pale. "I told you I was looking for Tyler, driving around the area, checking parking lots." "For an hour and a half?" Torres pressed. "That's a long time to be searching for a child who was supposedly just playing near the hotel." Monk leaned forward. "Here's what I think happened, David. I think Tyler didn't just wander off. I think you took him somewhere, and I think Rebecca knows more about it than she's telling us." "That's insane," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Why would I hurt Tyler? He's my nephew. I loved that kid." "Maybe you did," Torres said, "but love doesn't always prevent people from doing terrible things when they're desperate." Monk opened the file Torres had brought and pulled out several financial documents. "We did some digging into your background, David. Seems you've been having money problems for the past year. Your construction business is failing. You're behind on your mortgage and your credit cards are maxed out." David stared at the papers without speaking. "But Tyler had something you needed, didn't he?" Monk continued. "A life insurance policy from his parents' estate, $200,000 with you and Rebecca as the beneficiaries if anything happened to him before he turned 18. The color drained completely from David's face. "You're wrong. We didn't even know about that policy until after the custody hearing." "Actually, you did know," Torres said, pulling out another document. Because you're the one who suggested Rebecca apply for guardianship in the first place, and according to the insurance company, you called them 2 weeks ago asking about the payout procedures. David's hands began to shake. That doesn't mean anything. We wanted to make sure Tyler was properly protected. Monk stood up and began pacing around the small room. I think you planned this, David. I think you brought Tyler to Yellowstone specifically to kill him and make it look like an accident or an abduction. The remote location, the family vacation story, it was all a setup. No, David whispered. No, that's not what happened. Then tell us what did happen, Torres demanded, because right now, all the evidence points to you killing an 8-year-old boy for insurance money. David buried his face in his hands and began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was his anguished weeping. Finally, he looked up with red, swollen eyes. It was an accident, he said quietly. I swear to God it was an accident. Monk and Torres exchanged glances. They were finally getting somewhere. Tell us, Monk said, sitting back down. David took a shaky breath. Tyler had been having nightmares since his parents died. Terrible nightmares where he'd wake up screaming for his mom and dad. Rebecca couldn't handle it anymore. She was taking sleeping pills, antidepressants, barely functioning. He wiped his nose with his sleeve before continuing. I thought if Tyler wasn't there anymore, Rebecca could heal. She could get better, and we could start over somewhere else with the insurance money. So you decided to kill him, Torres said flatly. Not kill him, David said desperately. I was going to give him something to make him sleep, then leave him somewhere safe where he'd be found and taken into care, somewhere far away from us. But I gave him too much of Rebecca's sleeping medication. When we got to the river, he wasn't breathing anymore. The room fell silent as the full horror of David's confession sank in. Monk felt sick to his stomach, not just at the crime itself, but at the cold calculation that had gone into planning it. What about Marcus? Torres asked. The truck? The staged evidence? I knew Marcus had been following us, watching the house. When I saw his truck at a rest stop on the way to Yellowstone, I realized he was the perfect fall guy. I took his spare key from under the bumper. He always kept one there. After Tyler died, I used Marcus's truck to move the body, then abandoned it to make it look like he was responsible. Monk shook his head in disgust. And Rebecca, does she know what you did? David's silence was answer enough. She knows, Torres concluded. That's why she's been falling apart, and that's why you really hit her. She was going to confess, wasn't she? David nodded miserably. She keeps saying we have to tell the truth, that Tyler deserves justice. But I can't go to prison. I can't lose everything. You already lost everything, Monk said, standing up. David Morrison, you're under arrest for the murder of Tyler Morrison. You have the right to remain silent. As Monk read David his rights, he thought about the 8-year-old boy whose only crime had been surviving his parents' death and needing love and stability from the people who were supposed to protect him. Instead, Tyler had found greed and betrayal in the hearts of the family members he'd trusted most. Justice would be served, but it would never bring Tyler Morrison back home. 6 months after Tyler Morrison's death, Detective James Monk sat in the gallery of the Park County Courthouse, watching as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict in the case of the state of Wyoming versus David Morrison. On the count of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. A collective exhale filled the courtroom as David Morrison's shoulders slumped in defeat. Beside him, his defense attorney showed no emotion. They had known this day was coming since David's full confession 6 months earlier. Rebecca Morrison sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, her face gaunt and aged beyond her 34 years. She had spent the last 6 months in therapy and had testified for the prosecution, revealing the full extent of her husband's planning and her own knowledge of Tyler's murder. The guilt would follow her for the rest of her life, but she had finally chosen truth over loyalty to the man who had destroyed their family. Judge Patricia Hamilton looked down at David with stern disapproval. Mr. Morrison, you have been found guilty of the premeditated murder of an innocent child who depended on you for protection and love. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led David away, Monk caught Rebecca's eye across the courtroom. She nodded at him, a small gesture of gratitude for his persistence in finding Tyler's killer and bringing him to justice. After the courtroom cleared, Monk stepped outside into the crisp Wyoming air, where Detective Torres was waiting by their patrol car. "How do you feel?" she asked, as they prepared to drive back to the sheriff's department. "Tired," Monk admitted. "Satisfied that we got justice for Tyler, but tired of seeing what people are capable of doing to the ones they're supposed to love. The case had taken a toll on both detectives. The revelation that David Morrison had murdered his nephew for insurance money, then tried to frame the boy's biological uncle, had shaken their faith in the basic goodness of human nature. "What about Marcus Morrison?" Torres asked as they drove through downtown Cody. "He's clean," Monk replied. Turned out he had been following the family, but only because he was genuinely worried about Tyler's well-being. He suspected something wasn't right about David and Rebecca's finances and their sudden eagerness to take custody. His parole officer confirmed he was trying to get his life together so he could petition for visitation rights. So his instincts were right about David? Unfortunately, yes. Marcus Morrison may have had his problems with addiction, but he actually cared about Tyler's welfare. Meanwhile, the people everyone thought were the perfect guardians were planning to kill him for money. They drove in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts about the case that had consumed their lives for the past 6 months. Finally, Torres spoke up. "What's next for Rebecca?" "She's moving back to Billings to live with her sister," Monk said. "Lost her job, lost her house when she couldn't make the mortgage payments after David's arrest. But she's getting counseling, and she started volunteering with a children's grief support group. Says she wants to do something positive with what she learned from Tyler. That's something, I suppose." "It's more than David ever did," Monk replied grimly. "He never once showed genuine remorse for killing Tyler. Even during sentencing, he was more concerned about his own fate than the life he'd taken." As they pulled into the sheriff's department parking lot, Monk's phone rang. Another case, another crime that would require his attention and expertise. The work of a detective was never finished, and there would always be another family torn apart by violence and betrayal. But before answering the call, Monk took a moment to remember Tyler Morrison, an 8-year-old boy who had loved baseball and asked endless questions about the world around him, who had trusted the adults in his life to keep him safe and had paid for that trust with his life. In his desk drawer, Monk kept a small framed photo that Rebecca had given him during the investigation. It showed Tyler grinning at the camera, a gap where his front tooth should be, holding up a fish he'd caught on a camping trip with his biological parents before they died. "Justice served doesn't always feel like victory," Monk said quietly, looking at the photo one more time before placing it back in the drawer and reaching for his phone. "Some cases stayed with you forever, and Tyler Morrison's murder would be one of them." But knowing that David Morrison would spend the rest of his life in prison for his crime provided some measure of closure. Tyler's death had not been in vain if it prevented David from hurting anyone else. "Detective Monk speaking," he said, answering the phone and preparing to begin another investigation, another search for truth in a world that sometimes seemed to have precious little of it. But that was the job, to stand for the victims who could no longer speak for themselves, to find justice in the darkness, and to never stop fighting for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Tyler Morrison deserved nothing less, and neither did any of the other victims whose cases would cross Monk's desk in the years to come.